Well, good morning and welcome to another day of Bible study. So glad that you are back with us as we continue on through this journey of Party On, a look into the food of the Bible, the feasting of the Bible, the fellowship portions of the Bible, and just plain fun in most of these. Now, if you were with us yesterday, I know that yesterday's was quite a heavy topic that dealt with food, but also dealt with hospitality and culture and sexual identity. And so hopefully that wasn't too much to handle in that small package yesterday. But today we have what is not maybe such a complicated topic, but certainly a complicated title. And I think maybe the longest title of any of these studies here on day 17, Meal of Celebration at the Giving of the Law, which is kind of a clue as to the setting of where we are in Exodus chapter 24 today. And before we go any further, I just want to thank all of those who donate on our part of ChristTable.today. It is because of your involvement financially in this ministry that we are able to do this each and every day. And I want to thank you for being a partner, a team member with us. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, what this ministry is all about, because it's so much more than simply morning Bible studies. And in the fall, we have this whole big thing coming up that I'm excited about, I'm working on right now. And if you want to be a part of knowing all of those things and what's going on, go ahead and visit ChristTable.today and make sure to sign up for the email list. Now, today we are in Exodus chapter 24, and we are in the Sinai desert, right at the foot of Mount Sinai, with Moses and the people of Israel having left Egypt and headed towards the promised land. And we have this feast in the middle of the wilderness. And I find oftentimes that God does these kinds of things. Maybe you have been in a wilderness of your own and you felt like giving up. You couldn't quite see where you began because you've been in this wilderness for so long, and you certainly can't see where the end of the wilderness is. And in those moments, it's as though God prepares a table in front of you. And this is exactly what he does for some members of his people here. And so why don't we just go ahead and jump into the text, and then I'll comment through the text. And I think I have maybe one point at the end that I want to make, and then we will be done and on our way for today. So Exodus chapter 24, verse 1. And we'll read together all of these 11 verses. Then the Lord instructed Moses, "Come up here to me." Now, up here to me means the top of Mount Sinai, which is the place where Moses has already met with God. The 10 Commandments have been given. And so God calls seemingly here Moses back up to the top of the mountain. He says, "Come up here to me, but this time I don't want you to come alone. I want you to bring an entourage alongside of you." And so we're given a few names. Aaron, who is the high priest, but also the brother of Moses, who has been with Moses every step of the way, even from Egypt. Nadab and Abihu. Now, these two, I'll go ahead and tell you, these two named individuals are Moses' sons. So we have Moses' brother Aaron, his two sons, and then 70 of Israel's elders. And these are people who were appointed to help Moses do his work of leading the people by Jethro, his father-in-law's encouragement. Moses was just failing and floundering as a leader. And Jethro says, you've got to have some help. Appoint some people who can govern and be your right arm and be your left arm on behalf of the people. And so they appointed 70 elders over the people of Israel. And so this is the group that God now invites out from the people to his presence. Now, we've talked about this recently, but this is essentially an ecclesia. This is a group of people who are called out from the greater number to be a smaller number of people dedicated to something. And so what we have here is an ecclesia, a called out group that are called out to essentially be in the presence of God, which in the modern day is also what an ecclesia is. Now, I'm using this word, if you've not been a part of it. Ecclesia is the Greek word essentially for church, and it's the word that the New Testament uses for church. And it's not a building, it's not a brick and a mortar place. In fact, for centuries, the church had no buildings or brick or mortar places. And so the word that it used didn't define this location or place. It defined a people who are called out. of a larger group who were set apart for something, dedicated to something. And so this is the group of people here that we essentially have an ecclesia on our hands with Moses, his brother, his 2 boys, and now the 70 elders. And all of you must worship at a distance. So part of what happens in the Old Testament is, if you look upon God, it said that you will die, that God is so holy and so magnificent that he cannot be looked upon. And so this is essentially kind of what's going on here is God is saying, I want to call you up to the mountain where I am. And this is maybe going to be a holy, a worship event, but I'm going to have you do it still at a distance. Only Moses is allowed to come near the Lord. So with the office and with Moses himself, there come special privileges. He is the leader, and he is the person who is the under shepherd underneath God. And so not everyone has the same access to God at this point that Moses has. Not everyone has the same access to that relationship that Moses has. And so Moses is a bit of a mediator, a middleman between God and the people. And God is kind of reinforcing that here, that is the role that he has given to Moses, not to these elders, not to Aaron, not to the 2 boys either. The others must not come near, and none of the other people are allowed to climb up the mountain with him. So these 70 people, plus the boys, plus Aaron, are going to come part of the way up the mountain towards God, but only Moses can go the full distance. So Moses went down to the people, and he repeated all of these instructions that God had given to him and the regulations that God had given to him as well. And so this is a part of a larger conversation, and all the people answered with one voice, "We will do everything that the Lord has commanded." And it's kind of a funny statement if you know the rest of the story, because really the rest of the First Testament, the rest of the Old Testament, is essentially the people of God not doing everything that the Lord has commanded them to do. And so saying it doesn't necessarily make it true. Boy, there's some wisdom in that line, isn't there? Saying something does not necessarily make it true. We will do everything the Lord has commanded. And they don't. But Moses still carefully writes down all of the Lord's instructions, and this is what we have at this point. Early the next morning, Moses got up, built an altar at the foot of the mountain. He also set up 12 pillars, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent some of the young Israelite men out to present burnt offerings and to sacrifice bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Moses drained half the blood from these animals into basins. The other half he splattered against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, and read it aloud to the people. And again, they all responded, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded. We will obey." I wish I had time to go into all the sacrificial systems and all of that, but maybe at some point I'll do a whole study on that. And so let's just keep going. "We'll do everything the Lord has commanded. We will obey." Then Moses took the blood from the basin, splattered it over the people, declaring, "Look, this blood confirms the covenant that God has made with you in giving these instructions." And so a covenant is an agreement. And so God has set out a list of instructions, which are prior and after this. So the book of Exodus contains those. And God is saying, if you kind of agree to abide by these instructions, then there's going to be benefits to you because of that. And that is essentially the promised land and peace with God. And so the blood confirms the covenant, and the people said, "We will obey. We will follow these things." So then at that point, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel began to climb up the mountain. And there they saw the God of Israel. Now, the way that the text presents this seeing of the God of Israel, it's as though they are, well, in fact, here it is. Under his feet, there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky itself. And these nobles of Israel gazed upon God, but he did not destroy them. And so they gazed upon God, but the image that we see or that we're communicated is underneath his feet. And so it seems as though, interpreting the story here, what happened is they climb a portion of the way up the mountain. God presents himself there. They immediately fall down on their face, nose to the ground, bowing in honor maybe even perhaps fear in what's happening in that very moment. And so it seems as though all that they're really able to see of God is the ground underneath his feet, or his feet himself, because it says that they gaze upon God and he did not destroy him, but the part of God that they talk about is the part that's underneath his feet. So it seems as though their head is bowed now, nose to the pavement, nose to the ground, as it were, and they are allowed at that moment to look upon God. And it says, in fact, and I love this, kind of almost offered as an aside, in fact, they ate a covenant meal, eating and drinking in his presence. And so his presence remained, but now we're not told that they brought food up with them. Maybe we assume that from those peace offerings, those young bulls, that they brought food up on the mountain with them. It's just as possible that God actually provided the food and the meal and the eating and the drinking for him, which maybe would make sense. Either way, it was God's food that was offered to him on the altar, or food that he provided for them. But they eat a covenant meal. And essentially what this is doing is this is a meal of promise, where they have confirmed that we will obey you, Lord. We will follow your instructions. And now God is kind of confirming his end of it as well. But he's not confirming it by writing it down on stone tablets and saying, I hereby give you the promised land. He's not confirming it by speaking it to them in his loud, booming voice, or by using Moses as a messenger to confirm, yeah, okay, I'm going to hold up my end of the promises that I made to you. He's actually, it seems, confirming it through a meal, through eating and drinking in his presence. And we tend to do this as well. Sometimes we'll say here in the United States that handshake and a man's word should be as good as his handshake. But oftentimes these agreements between people are made over meals, are made over business lunches, or made over dinners in homes or in restaurants, or come over to the office and I'll ask the secretary or the admin to order in some food, and let's have a conversation and work all of this out. And so this practice, even yet today, is one that remains, confirming agreements over meals. And so I think what is interesting about this passage is this gives us some insight into who God is, that he takes initiative to essentially sign on the dotted line by way of a meal, by way of food. And I think that this boils down to this kind of, I think, really important statement that on the surface seems super simple, but the extent of it really is extremely important and extremely incredible, that God confirms himself at the table. Now we see this here, that God confirms himself at the table with 74 people. And so God kind of confirms himself at this table with this meal. But we see this all throughout Scripture. In Revelation, God is going to confirm his love and his leadership of humanity through what we term the marriage meal, or the marriage supper of the Lamb. We see that Jesus implements the Lord's Supper, communion at the table, and it's essentially an agreement. In fact, the words of institution of the cup specify an agreement between God and humanity for the forgiveness of sins. And so every time we eat that bread and drink from that cup, we confirm anew what God is confirming as well at that table. It's a reminder meal. And so God confirms himself at the table here in Exodus 24. God continues to confirm himself and his love for us and his agreement to uphold his end of salvation for us at the table in perpetuity through the Lord's Supper. And I think that even around our own tables, even around your own table, God confirms himself. I think if we prioritize a meal. As we spoke yesterday, meals with strangers, with refugees, aliens, foreigners, with people who are disconnected from faith or with their community. If we prioritize the table as God prioritizes the table, then God will begin to confirm things at that table. I have learned more about God, about myself, and about my spirituality sitting at a meal around the table with other people than I have ever learned sitting in a church pew or listening to Bible studies, or I will even say probably even being in the Bible on my own. There is something holy, sacred, instructional, and godly about being around a table in a shared meal where, and in Exodus 24, it points out that God's presence was there, where God is present. Now, how is God present at your table? It's probably not because you have a little idol, a little Buddha or something sitting on the table. Maybe God is present at the table by the company that you've invited. Maybe he's present there in them, and we've pointed that out. Maybe God is present in the conversation. And maybe God is present in the outcomes of that meal, of the hope, of the joy, and the peace that come as a result of that. Maybe God is there in the synergy of the community. Or maybe, and hopefully, God is there present in you at the table and me. But I believe that whenever we gather together as people of faith with other people who have no faith, or who have deep faith, or who are on the margins of faith, that God is present there in some way, and that he will confirm who he is, his love for us, his hope for us, his refinement of us at the table. Do not forsake the power or the importance of the table or the meal. And so I say, as I say every day, party on.